Did you know that we can improve our MS symptoms with physical exercise and physical therapy? It's true. I'm very excited for today's video because I have Dr. Gretchen Hawley as my guest again. Dr. Gretchen is a physical therapist, multiple sclerosis certified specialist, and creator of the MSing Link, an online wellness program for multiple sclerosis. And now she can add author to that list. Today, we're going to talk about her brand new book, The MSing Link, the essential guide to improve walking, strength, and balance for people with multiple sclerosis. Welcome, Dr. Gretchen.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so pleased that you could join me again. And I am really excited about your new book. I absolutely loved it. To begin with, talk a little bit about why you decided to write this book and how it came about.
Absolutely. So, really, I didn't know this at the time, but I had an experience back in 2016. I was a brand new MS specialist at this time. And one thing that I wanted to do early on in my career as an MS specialist was go to MS support groups because I really wanted to help people with MS more so than who could just come to the specific clinic that I worked at. And so it was my very first support group, and I went there feeling kind of silly, like, who am I? Yes, I'm a physical therapist, but I'm this new MS specialist, new in the MS world. The people here are people living with MS. Like, they're the ones that have had it and experienced it for so long. Who am I to educate them on things that they can do? But I gave it anyways. I had prepared the whole presentation. So I gave the presentation, and I was just shocked at how many people, every person there, was writing notes frantically from each slide that I presented. And it just blew my mind that they weren't getting this information from their current healthcare providers that they were working with. And so when I started thinking about my next adventure as an entrepreneur and physical therapist, I immediately thought back to that experience. And I thought, you know what? Yes, I have my online program, the MSing Link. I'm all over social media, but I don't have any resources for the type of person that prefers to get their information by reading. And so that's what started my initial thought of, should I write a book and what would I talk about in this book?
Oh, that is so awesome. I love books. You can see my bookshelf in the background. I just think they're a great thing to have on hand for a reference. Like, what did Dr. Gretchen say about sensory problems? And I can go and grab my book and flip through it and find out what you said. So I'm so glad that you made the book. Early on in the book, you talk about how regular exercise is important, but you also say it's okay to do light exercise on those really high fatigue days. And you talk about so many exercises that we can do sitting down. And most of us don't consider sitting down with exercise. Can you talk a little bit about the exercises we can do sitting down?
Definitely. And I'm so glad you asked this question, because one thing that I mentioned in the book that I think is really important before we even talk about exercising is, what is the definition of exercise? Because for a lot of us, myself included, it used to mean running and treadmill and jumping jacks and lunges. And when you have MS, almost always, those things I just mentioned are really hard. And if you can't do those things, then you might feel like you can't exercise. But in reality, exercise is movement, whether you're standing or sitting or even in your bed or on your couch. There's so many different ways to exercise. So for starters, I think we need to start that conversation of what is exercise, because then it includes more people and it doesn't exclude anyone who can't run or do jumping jacks. So that's the first part of the conversation. But the second part is, seated exercises are my absolute favorite. And the reason for that is because the majority of us, myself included, sit for most of the day. If you have a job or even if you're at home, unless you're up most of the day running around, doing errands, doing chores, most of us sit a lot. And therefore, if we're sitting and we don't have seated exercises to do, we wouldn't think to move our body when we're sitting. But since we sit so much throughout the day, if you have exercises that you can do while you're sitting, it makes it so much easier to fit them in throughout the day, especially if you're someone who has high fatigue. So many of my clients are not able to exercise for a full 30 minutes at a time, or 40 or 45, because of either a busy schedule or high fatigue. And so if you can break the exercises up throughout your day, which MS research shows is just as effective, you're more likely to do it and to see better results because you're getting that rest time automatically built in.
Oh, that's so awesome. And I also love that you talk about how we can increase our heart rates sitting down. The punching exercises and the arm exercises that we can do sitting down really gets our aerobic activity to increase.
Definitely. And there's so many different types of exercises that you can do sitting down. So aerobic, and in the book that I counted recently, there's over 100 photos, professional photos that were taken for the book. So there's a lot in there. But there's cardio exercises, which are the ones you just mentioned, of just, moving your arms quickly, or you could do your legs, but I like to do my arms for cardio. There's strengthening exercises sitting down that you can do for your upper body, core, legs, feet, ankles, knees, hips, all the above. There's stretching exercises. There's coordination exercises. You can pretty much do any exercise seated, but you could also do standing. And again, they're just easier to fit in. So it also, one more point on that. It also takes balance out of the equation. So sometimes when we're doing standing exercises, it's not as good of quality because it requires balance. Right. And so if you really want to focus on strengthening, take balance out of the equation. Sit down and do the exercises.
Yeah, that was one of my ahas in the book. And another one of my ahas was you wrote about sensory changes and what we can do about that. And I love that you included that. Can you share a little bit of the things that we can do for sensory changes?
Yes, I was really excited for that chapter. It's chapter 2, and it's before I jump into a lot of the strengthening exercises, and I touch on a bunch of different symptoms that don't really have anything to do with weakness, sensation being one of them. And this is one of my favorite exercises because it's something that a lot of people don't know about, but it can make a big difference. So just to clarify, any type of sensory change might feel different for each person. So it's things like numbness, tingling, burning, pins and needles, bugs crawling. I'm trying to think of all the other words I've heard, but things like that. And so what the exercise is you want to desensitize the area. So you touch the area, could be your foot, your hand, wherever it is. You touch the area with something that bothers it, something that feels sensitive and maybe causes that numbness or tingling or burning to intensify a little bit. But you don't stop. You keep going for several minutes. And over time, the idea is that your brain understands that while it might be uncomfortable, it's not life-threatening. You're actually okay. You're still surviving. And so that irritability starts to lessen and it desensitizes the area. So my favorite way to do this for hands and feet are to get a bowl or a bucket or a Ziploc bag and put dried rice in it. And then you put your hand or your foot in it and just move it around. You can pick it up, put it down, roll side to side, front and back. And again, usually it will be uncomfortable at first. It will cause your sensory change to maybe heighten, but then it should start to lessen. And I had an experience with an in-person client of mine a few years ago. We were focusing on a lot of strengthening and balance and walking exercises, but she came in. She was my final patient of the day. It was around 7 p.m. And she was almost in tears. She was in so much pain in her feet, in both of her legs. And I was very clear early on that this was not a day that we were going to do any type of balance or strengthening exercises. And so I brought over a bucket of rice and I had her put her feet in. And we just talked. It was nice for me because we could just chat about life, what we were going to do that weekend. And within about 5 minutes, she was like, oh my gosh, it's starting to lessen. This does feel better. And after 10 minutes, it felt significantly better. So it is something that you need to do consistently. It's not like you do it once and then you're good to go, but it can make a real impact. So I think it's important people know about it.
That is such a great tip. One of the things that I have is under my desk, I have a foot machine, and it is to help me keep my legs moving. And it has roller balls on one side, and my feet are ticklish. So it is an uncomfortable sensation for me to roll my foot across these roller balls, but my left foot definitely has sensation changes from my MS. And I find when I do consistently roll my foot back and forth on those roller balls, it does help.
Right. And that's the thing too. It can be anything. I like dried rice, because it has sharp and dull edges. So it's two sensations in one. But you can use anything. And if you're someone who's really sensitive, I actually usually start with a cotton ball, something as soft and squishy as a cotton ball. It doesn't need to be anything super intense, but it could be anything. It could be the pen, and you just kind of brush it on the area or pounce it on the area.
Okay.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be rice. It could be anything that you've got.
Nice. That's a great tip. You also talk about how physical therapy and exercise can help with cognition. And I hadn't really thought about that before. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there's lots of different cognitive symptoms that can happen in MS. And for a lot of them, seeing someone who's trained in cognitive behavioral therapy or even speech and language pathology can be really helpful. But one that physical therapy can be really helpful for is the cognitive symptom of difficulty multitasking. So doing two things at once. And most of my clients that I work with experience this in the sense of having difficulty walking and talking to someone at the same time, or walking or even doing an exercise and listening to someone. I can't tell you how many times I was working with a client and I was having them do an exercise, and I'd just be chatting away. I'd say, so what are you doing this weekend? Your knee looks great, but bend your foot and blah, blah, blah. And so often they would stop me. They'd say, Dr. Gretchen, I cannot listen to you as I'm doing this exercise. Like, please stop talking. And I realized it was because it's difficult to multitask. So there is an exercise that you can do for that. And basically, you make yourself multitask with a physical movement and a cognitive movement. Because if you think about it, when you're walking and talking, it's physical, the walking, and cognitive, which is talking or listening. So you make yourself do that, but in a situation where it's not as challenging. So my favorite example of this would be to pick an easy physical exercise. So if you've got better arm strength and leg strength, you could use your arms to just punch forward, or maybe upper body jumping jacks. It really doesn't matter what it is. You pick some movement and then combine it with a cognitive task. So one idea, and the one that's easier for me, is to think of all the things that you might find in a refrigerator and say those things out loud as you're doing your exercise. So you might be punching forward and you're saying apples, oranges, almond milk, regular milk, flaxseed, eggs. And you're just going back and forth. How many things can you name? And you'll get to a point where you're like, oh my gosh, what else is in a fridge? I don't know. And you're really going to have to think. Another idea, if you're more of a numbers person, you could count down from 100 by threes. I am not a numbers person, so that's really challenging for me. But I had a lot of clients who could get down into the 50s. I was like, wow, we got to make something more challenging for you, because that's really hard and you are acing it. So that's the idea, though. You pick a physical and a cognitive movement and do them together. And over time, that should make multitasking a bit easier.
Oh, fantastic. Also, the last time that you were on the channel, we spoke about neuroplasticity, and you include information in the book on neuroplasticity and how to activate it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, neuroplasticity is the reason that people with MS can get stronger, improve your strength, improve your balance and walking by rewiring or strengthening the pathways from your brain to your muscles. And so one way that we can do that is with specific exercises, and we go a lot into that in the book, but there's also other ways, and that includes things like urgency. So creating some form of urgency either within the exercise itself, which might be timing yourself, or it could be during your rest time. My favorite example of urgency, do you know the Bop It game?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Bop It is a kid's toy, which I actually never played with as a toy. I just learned about it a few months ago. So I purchased it just off of Amazon, and it's a toy. If you don't know what it is, it's a toy where there's directions. It tells you verbally what to do, and you have to do it. Otherwise, you lose the game. So you can bop it, you can spin something, you can pull, twist, or flick. and it tells you what to do in all these random orders. And it's really challenging. And not only that, but there's music playing in the background, and the music speeds up. So you feel even more of a sense of urgency. So there's this sense of challenge and urgency, and my heart gets racing as I'm doing it. So I like to do that between my sets of exercises. So the urgency and the challenge is while you're resting. And so you play 1 or 2 rounds, then you go back to your marching exercise. Or your leg kick. So that's one way that you can increase neuroplasticity. Another one is through focused attention. You need to be really focused on what you're doing. If you're doing your exercises, but you're instead thinking about what you're going to make for dinner tonight, or who you need to call to catch up with, or what your grocery list is going to be, research shows that neuroplasticity will take an even longer time to occur. So being very focused with where your attention is, and it should be on your exercises. And then one of my other favorite ones, there's 5 total, but one of my other favorite ones is salience, which basically means having a why, like having an important reason of why this is important to you. And I like to mention this one because it doesn't come naturally for a lot of people. A lot of people think exercise just something we've got to do to be healthy, or, something to cross off the list. But if you can associate any exercise, whether it's a specific exercise or your exercise routine as a whole, if you can associate that with a deeper meaning of why it's important for you, you're way more likely to create those neural pathways, and even faster than if you didn't have that meaning. And so the exercise that I like to take people through to come up with a why is to keep asking yourself why you want to exercise. And I'll just give one quick example. So I was talking to one of my clients who knew what to do for her exercises. She just wasn't doing it. And so I said, okay, well, why do you want to exercise? And she said, because I want to be strong. I said, why do you want to be strong? And she said, because if I'm strong, I can walk better. I said, why do you want to walk better? And she said, if I can walk better, I can leave my house more. I won't be as isolated. I said, okay, why do you want to leave the house more? Why do you want to not be isolated? And we went down this rabbit hole of why. And at the end, it was that she wanted to exercise so that she could get stronger, not be as isolated, and therefore provide her son with better experiences because she can do more things with her son. And so you can see how that's going to be way more motivating than just because I want to get stronger.
Yeah, you shared that story in the book, and that was such a powerful moment. We all want to change. We want to exercise, we want to diet, we want to be stronger, we want to be healthier. But if we just say, oh, I want to be stronger, okay. But if we figure out why we want to be stronger, that story gave me goosebumps. She wants to be stronger so she can participate in her son's life.
Yeah.
That's a huge motivator to do those exercises every day.
It really is. And not only that, we even went into, okay, what things would you want to do with your son? And she started talking further about she wants to walk from house to house for trick-or-treating during Halloween. She wants to walk him down the aisle at his future wedding. Keep in mind, her son is 10 years old right now. So that's a long ways away. But, get really, really specific. It can help a lot.
Yes. Excellent. In one of the chapters, you talk about the different types of exercise. And if you had asked me before reading this book, what are the types of exercise, I would say aerobic and strength training. But there's a lot more than that. Can you talk about those?
Definitely. Yeah. Anytime I ask someone, hey, what in your mind, what are the types of exercises? It's aerobic and strengthening. And every now and then someone does throw in flexibility. So like stretching, which is true. Those are 3 great types of exercises, but it's so much more than that. And it's important to know how many types there are, because oftentimes what happens if you're only focusing on 1 or 2 types of exercise is that you are more likely to not reach your goals, because almost every goal of functional movement requires more than 1. It usually requires 4 to 6. So you might feel like you're kind of reaching 1 goal, but you're just not quite there. Why not? And it's probably because you're not including multiple types. And number 2, you're more likely to have aches and pains in your joints and in your muscles if you're only focusing on one or two types. So strengthening, of course, is one of them. Aerobic exercise, of course. Speed is another one. Endurance training. And those four in particular are really important to differentiate because you train them differently. Strength and speed require strengthening exercises and speed exercises. Your speed will not improve if you're not doing speed exercises. And so often people will say, I've been doing strengthening exercises for months. Why am I not any faster? Or I've been doing strengthening exercises for years. Why is my balance still bad? Like, well, because you're not doing balance exercises or you're not doing speed exercises. So balance, of course, would be another one. High intensity interval training, any type of class. So that could be swimming of any kind, whether it's aerobics or actually swimming. It could be Tai Chi. It could be really anything. Oh, stretching, of course, was another one. There's a lot. And the important thing to know is that depending on what your goals are, you do the specific types of exercises associated with that goal.
So one of the things you talked about was functional exercise. And I was really fascinated by what you said about that. Things like muscle carryover and do the thing that's hard and exaggerating walking. And you talked about functional position and places in the home. Can you explain a little bit more about functional exercise?
Yes. So functional exercise means picking a goal that you have that is an activity. So it's not just, I want to get stronger. I want to have better balance. Walking better is a good example, though, because walking is an activity. And so you pick a goal, any goal, and you break that goal down into as many movements as possible. So, for example, walking requires 7 separate movements, or standing up from a low surface takes 5 to 6 separate movements. And so those separate movements are your functional exercises. Let's take walking as the example. In order to just take one single step forward, you need to be able to shift your body weight forward and backwards, bend your knee, swoop your toes up so that you don't have foot drop, straighten your knee, put your heel down first, and all while that was happening, you were standing on one leg. Oh, and marching, I forgot that one, which is bringing your knee up towards the ceiling. So that's 7 movements. And then you have to do the same thing on the other leg. That was just to bring one leg forward. And then you got to do the same thing on the other side and then keep repeating. So each of those 7 movements can be done individually as an exercise. So for example, the first thing that I mentioned was shifting your weight forward and backwards. That could be an exercise that you practice. Staggered stance, shift your weight forward and then back, slow and steady. Or marching was one that I mentioned. Just practice marching, standing or sitting. Lift one leg up and down and the other leg up and down. So instead of just practicing the whole movement in that sequence, separate each movement and do it as its own exercise. So that's what functional exercise is. But as you mentioned, I then go into functional positions and functional locations. So a functional position means the position that you need to be in to do that activity. So for walking, we're standing. So the functional position is going to be standing. But if it's a seated-based goal, the functional position is going to be seated. If it's standing up from the floor, the functional position might be sitting, but on the floor. Or if it's getting out of bed, that's usually more of a seated position. And so you would want to do the exercises in the seated position or in the standing position based on what position you need to be in to do that activity. And then to take it one final step further is location. So often we think that we need to exercise at a gym or outside, but the best thing that you can actually do is to exercise in the specific location that you need to be able to do that activity in. So let's stick with walking. If you want to be able to walk, where do you want to be able to walk? In your home, practice the exercises in your home. Outside on a sidewalk, practice the exercises on a sidewalk. On grass, practice them on standing on grass. Pick those situations that you have goals in and exercise there. If your goal is to get in and out of a car, practice the seated marching in your car. Like, that is the best way to get your brain to understand not only do you want strength in those areas, but when to utilize that strength.
That is so perfect. One of my goals is I want to be able to get up and down off the floor, not just for me, but I want to be able to play with my grandkids, and I want to be able to be strong enough, flexible enough to do that. So doing exercises that get me on and off the floor are important. One of the things that I often say is what gets measured gets managed. When doing physical therapy, why is it important to measure where we start and our progress along the way?
Yes, this is such a great question. And there's a few different reasons why it's important. It depends who we're doing it for. So sometimes it's important for insurance purposes. If you're getting physical therapy in person and your physical therapist needs to justify that you need more PT, or maybe you're done with PT or being discharged, one really important factor in determining getting more visits is showing your progress. And not the only way, but the best way that insurance companies like to see that is through numbers, like how fast are you walking or how many times can you do this? So that's one reason measuring is going to be important. But what I think is even more important is how are you measuring how you're doing? For some people, not all, but for a lot of people, seeing results is what is your biggest motivator to staying consistent with your exercises. And so if you're not tracking anything, or if you're only tracking that you did 10 repetitions or 6 repetitions, it's so much harder and maybe almost impossible to see the small growth that you're actually reaping benefits from the exercises. And so there's lots of ways that you can measure your progress. And a lot of them are in the physical therapy clinic or in your neurologist's office, such as the timed 25-foot walk test. That's probably the one that most people are aware of, and there's more than that. But I was thinking over the last few years, there's got to be a way to do this at home where you can keep up your progress and keep measuring so that you can stay more motivated, because you might only go to your neurologist's office once or twice a year. You might go to your physical therapist's office consistently, but once you're discharged, you might not see them for 6 months. And so I found ways that you can measure your progress at home with tests like the timed 25-foot walk test. And essentially what you do is you pick landmarks that never move. So for me, in the room that I'm in right now, I could pick this wall and it has a window. So maybe I start at the window and then there's another wall through the door right there. There's nothing in this pathway that would get in my way. So it's clear. And I don't know exactly how far it is. It's probably not 25 feet. But when you're doing it at home, it doesn't really matter as long as those landmarks never move. The landmarks is more of what we're going by. You can try to get it as close to 25 feet as possible if you want to, but it's more about just having something consistent to track. So I might find that today I can walk from this wall to that wall in 10 seconds. In 1 month from now, it takes me 9 seconds. In 2 months from now, it takes me 7 seconds. In 3 months, maybe I'm back up to 8, but hey, 8 is still better than the 10 seconds it was initially. And so having something like that at home, even if it's not super accurate according to how your neurologist would do it, it's at least a way that you can track and stay on track of how you're doing with your exercises.
I love that. I am a data geek. I love tracking numbers and trends, and having that to do at home. Like you said, we might be doing all the exercises and not noticing the subtle improvements that we're seeing. So if we are doing, for instance, the timed walk, and we're like, hey, wow, I am 3 seconds faster than I used to be, that's kind of motivating. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
There are 2 terms that you use in the book: neuro recovery training and composition training. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yes. So neuro recovery is most of what we've been talking about so far, which is recovering your neural pathways and or finding new neural pathways. And the way that you do that is through exercise. The other type is compensation, where you're compensating either with a tool that can be helpful, or with other muscles that are already stronger. So my favorite example of this is the marching exercise. So to do the marching exercise in a seated position, you'd be sitting either up tall or recline, and you would then bring one foot off the ground. So you're lifting your knee up towards the ceiling and then down, and then the other side up and down. I have so many clients who cannot lift one of their legs, or they can, but it is so challenging. So to improve that, we've got 3 options. 1, neuro recovery, which is no matter how much weakness you have, still practice it. Don't use your arms, don't use anything to help. Make it as easy as possible. So maybe change positions. So instead of sitting up, you're reclined, or maybe you do it lying on the ground. Make it as easy as possible, but still practice lifting your knee up and down, even if it's not lifting at all. That's the power of neuroplasticity. Option number 2 is to use muscles that are stronger. So in this case, you could use your arms. You could still try your best to lift with your leg muscles, but your arms can help you lift it, and then down, and then up and down. And your arms help assisting with every single repetition. The third option is to compensate with a helpful tool like the leg lifter. The leg lifter looks like a dog leash, but it's more taut. It's not as wiggly. And you just hook it around your foot, and then you use your arms to lift and move your foot. So there's 3 different options. And I always prefer that my clients do all 3, because if you're only ever doing the strengthening option, it takes a while. You might not notice improved strength for a few months, up to maybe even 2 years. So if you're not using any compensation strategies or tools, you might never get up and go to the bathroom because you're waiting for the strength to come and you just don't have it yet. Or if you only ever use tools, you're not actually going to get any stronger, so your walking's not going to get any easier. So it's important to not feel like you have to do one or the other. There's a time and place for all 3.
I love that. And I love that you say using tools or aids doesn't mean that we're giving up. It just means that we're taking charge of our mobility and utilizing tools to improve our strength, stay independent, and functional. You mentioned the foot lift tool. Do you have other favorite tools that we could use?
I do. And some of my favorite tools are for foot drop. And when you think about foot drop, a lot of people think about AFOs. So for those that don't know, it's an ankle foot orthosis, and it's the ones that are carbon fiber or plastic. There's a foot plate and it goes all the way up to somewhere around your knee. It might be the back or the front or the side. So a lot of people think about AFOs or electrical stimulation devices like the Walk8 or the BioNest. Those are great. But one of my favorite tools outside of those for foot drop are ankle braces. There's a lot on the market now. There's some I like, some I don't like. The ones that I do like are stretchy. And so the Dictus band is one of my favorites because it uses a very thick rubber band to assist with lifting your ankle. Another recent one that I got and really like is the Elevate 360, which again, there's flexibility within the strap that they use. And the reason I like those is because of the stretchy strap. It assists instead of resists. There's another one that's on the market. You can get it at like Walgreens. It's called the Foot Up. But the Foot Up, the thing that attaches the brace to your foot is rigid. And so instead of helping you lift your foot, it just prevents it from dropping. So there's a big difference. One of them, you're using your muscles. One of them, you're not. I could go off further on that, but I'll try to not do that. So, but those ankle braces are some of my favorite tools. The leg lifter is another one of my favorite ones. The car cane is something you can use to put in the latch of a car door, and it can help you feel more stable because you have something to hold on that's sturdy as you're sitting down. So that's another one. And then just mobility aids in general. Biacres, so lightweight, probably one of my favorite ones. Neo walking sticks, so fun, fashionable, really can match your style and your vibe. So those are just some of my favorites.
It's so important that we have all the tools in our toolbox at the ready for us to use.
Yeah, it really is. And so many people, I think this is just starting to come around as being a bit more popular, which is fantastic. But for a while, so many people were resistant to using any mobility aid because they viewed it as their disease is progressing. And that's not true at all. A mobility aid does not have to be something that you become dependent on. It's just something that you use when you need it. And the way to not become dependent on it is to not put too much body weight through it, to just use it as lightly as you need to. And sometimes you might need a rollator. On other days, you might need trekking poles. On other days, you might not need anything at all. And it's okay and normal to switch to different mobility aids based on what you need that day.
I once heard someone explain using a wheelchair and shifting their mindset from being confined to a wheelchair to being liberated by it. Without the wheelchair, they would have been confined to their home or confined to their bed. And with it, they're liberated and able to participate in life. So they're there to aid us to be more functional and to participate in life more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the stigma with it is just what we see on TV and in magazines. And we very often, or very rarely rather, see anyone portraying using a wheelchair or using canes or trekking poles. But it is starting to change. I have noticed Target in particular has had some ads out and even big photos in their store of women in wheelchairs demonstrating what the clothing looks like. And so I think the more things like that come around, the more we'll see, oh, okay, this is normal. Like this, I don't have to be old to use a wheelchair or to use a walker. Like this is for anyone who needs it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we have, one of the things that has been so important about social media and the changes we've seen in the internet is there are so many people now who are disabled, partially disabled, need mobility aids, and they're showing how fashionable it can be. So that's really impressive too.
Yeah, I love that. I follow many of those accounts.
Yeah. So one of the other things that I really love about your book is at the end of each chapter, you have key takeaways. And one of the things that you include in every key takeaway list is have hope. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that was something that was so important to me. And I don't know if it's just me. I have a feeling that it's not. But for me, if I don't have hope in something, then I'm not going to stay consistent at it. I'm not going to keep doing it. And if I don't have hope, I'm not going to see the point in it. And so for me, I think if you can have hope, specifically that it is possible for you to reach your goals, we are all going to be way more likely to actually do what it takes. And it's even harder when you have MS. There's no denying how challenging MS can be. And so not only do you need to have hope, but you need to have resilience. You need to have that dedication. Of course, it's okay to take rest days when you need them and take time off when you need to. But if you have hope, if you really, truly believe that it is possible for you to reach these goals, for you to become that person that you want to be, even with MS, you're so much more likely to trust yourself, listen to your body, and implement the things that you can when you can. And so I just think that the take-home message for me, of course, there's so much education, there's exercises, there's strategies, but none of it will mean anything unless you actually implement it. And the way to implement it is to have hope and belief that it is possible.
That is so true. The name of my channel is Even So, It Is Well. It's a line from one of my favorite hymns. And it's a reminder that even so, I've got this condition. Even so, things might get worse. Even so, there are bad days. It can still be well. We can still live really well with MS. So that's the perfect note to end the interview. Thank you so much for being my guest again. I so appreciate it. Tell people where they can find you, where they can find the program, the MSing Link, and where they can find your book.
Absolutely. So there's lots of different avenues. I'm all over social media, but some of the best ones would be my website. That's where you'll find all of my things. So that is drgretchenhawley.com, all spelled out. I'm also on YouTube as Dr. Gretchen Hawley, Instagram as dr.gretchen, and then I have my podcast, which is called The MSing Link. So I'll be talking about the release of the book and sending out emails, sending everyone on my email list about it. So any of those avenues will bring you to the information that I have.
Awesome. And I will also include links in the description below the video so you can find Dr. Gretchen and her book. Thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. If you like this video, please give it a like, the thumbs up under the video, and don't forget to subscribe. This will help others find the channel as well. And if you'd like to sign up for my newsletter, there is a link in the description below to do that as well. Until next time, be well.